Welcome to our Best of the Rest series for Phyrexia All Will Be One spoiler season, where we cover all the cards that weren't spoiled individually so you don't have to do it yourself. This is the first of a few of these videos, so get comfy and of course, be sure to say hello to our friend Steven, the thumbs up button under the video. Steven, looking a little different than normal. It's probably nothing. Let's begin. Basilica Shepherd is 3 of anything and 2 white for a 3/3 Phyrexian Angel with flying. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 might tokens. This is a solid common and limited. The cost is high, but that's because it has flying, to be honest. It'd be cheaper without it, but I'll take it at this cost. A 3/3 in the air is powerful, and bringing along another 2 power and toughness and toxic 1 twice, that's a lot of value for 5 mana. Even if the tokens can't block, it's an early-ish pick and limited. Charge of the Mites is 2 of anything and 1 white for an instant, choose 1. It deals damage equal to the number of creatures you control the target creature or planeswalker, or create 2 1/1 mites. Instant speed helps this a lot. If this were sorcery speed, I'd be very unimpressed, but damage-based removal isn't especially popular in white outside of combat tricks, and if you can't utilize the removal part of the card, you get 2 1/1s. At least it has versatility. This is still removal, so I rank it slightly higher than middle of the road, but you're going to want to try finding more efficient and reliable removal early in your pack before taking this exact card. Fluncing Raptor is 2 of anything and 1 white for a 2/2 Phyrexian bird with flying and toxic 1. When it enters the battlefield, another target creature you control with toxic gets +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. You only need a few toxic creatures in your deck for this to go from filler to decent. 3 mana for a 2/2 flyer is pretty run-of-the-mill. Toxic is a great addition here because having toxic with an evasive keyword makes it much more reliable and effective. That last trigger is a great way to start the toxic train rolling, but isn't even necessary for this to fill a curve. It's just fine. Indoctrination Attendant is 4 mana for a 3/4 Phyrexian cleric with toxic 1. When it enters the battlefield, you may return another permanent you control to its owner's hand. If you do, create a 1/1 might. This card's a bit weird. Unsummoning your own stuff to get a 1/1 doesn't sound great, but if you have an enter the battlefield ability to work with, of course this gains value. It's going to depend entirely on the rest of your deck, but if you erase that ability altogether, 4 mana for a 3/4 with toxic 1 is on the lower end of the middle of the pack. Leonin Lightbringer is 3 mana for a 3/2 cat rebel with ward 2. As long as it's equipped, it gets +1/+1. Solid card, even better with equipment. 3 mana for a 3/2 with pseudo protection is a good curve filler if you're lacking in the 3-drop slot. Now, the equipment you're going to get in this limited format is either going to be gigantic or tiny. I wouldn't put too much effort into building with the Lightbringer in mind, but if you happen to end up with a few equipment, it's kind of a happy accident. Mandible Justicar is 2 mana for a 2/1 artifact creature Phyrexian cleric with lifelink. When another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, this Armmouth artifact gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Perfect 2-drop at common. Comes with a keyword that isn't terrible and it gets boosted to 3 power sometimes. Early in the game, 2 power with lifelink will do well holding off attacking, as the swing back will oftentimes undo any progress your opponent makes. At worst, it's something to get in the way and save you some life points. Mirrodin Bardich is 5 mana for an artifact equipment with an equip cost of 4, and it has 4 Mirrodin. Equipped creature gets +2/+1 and has vigilance. It comes down as a 5 mana 4/3 with vigilance, which isn't super, but it is a common, so you can't expect too much here. It isn't overly powerful, but if you're looking for more late game staying power in your deck, this is a consideration. It's not a super high limited priority, but we've seen worse cards. Plated Onslaught is 3 of anything and 2 white for an instant with affinity for artifacts. Creatures you control get +2/+1 until end of turn. Okay, this card is real good and so explosive. Can't believe it's an instant. If you're playing mites or anything small, or actually just any deck running white that can reliably get to double white mana, this is worth considering. Look at this as a game-ending spell. You go wide on the board, swing in, and even with just 1 or 2 artifacts, the cost is reduced significantly enough that your opponent will not expect an anthem coming at them at instant speed. This card has outrageous potential with an absurd piece of combat tech. It's just insane. Zealot's Conviction is 1 mana for an enchantment aura with flash. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1. As long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, enchanted creature gets an additional +1/+0 and has first strike. Wouldn't slot this into just any white deck. If you're light on playables and need to round out your 40 cards with a combat trick, you could do worse than this, but I would need a comfortable amount of toxic enablers in my deck to give this an auto spot. If you do get corrupted, 1 mana for +2/+1 and first strike is a real different story, especially at instant speed. You're gonna have to feel this one out, but with how absurdly broken the set is so far, I'm trying to adjust my expectations for performance. Aspirant's Ascent is 1 blue for an instant. Until end of turn, target creature gets +1/+3 and gains flying and toxic 1. Like Wings of the Cosmos, this card is pseudo-good sometimes. It's more awkward than not. It's built as a defensive card that gives flying, so the assumption is that you're blocking a big flyer and taking it down, but it also gives toxic for basically no reason. Giving +1/+3 and toxic together is weird. I'm assuming it's flavor related, but the only times that would be relevant is if this is on a trampoline creature or you're using it to survive a burn spell while attacking and you're unblocked. Regardless, it isn't a great card, could be a filler in some situations, but you're going to need to justify its inclusion. Chrome Prowler is 3 mana for a 3/2 artifact creature Phyrexia and cat with flash. When it enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls. The cat's fine. 3 mana for a 3/2 with flash can jump in and take down a creature your opponent thought was safe. It can also flash in on the end of your opponent's turn and tap down a blocker, then swing in with full mana and basically 3 free power. It's a fine card. It's nothing great, it's nothing bad, it's fine. Escaped Experiment is 2 mana for a 2/1 artifact creature Phyrexian Beast. Whenever it attacks, target creature an opponent controls gets -X/-0 until end of turn, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Another 2 mana 2/1, but this one with a narrower ability than the lifelinker we saw earlier. It does enable itself, so you'll be stealing 1 power on attack, but this card only has 1 toughness to begin with, and it's only good when the experiment itself is attacking, so even if you have a million artifacts, whatever you shrink is just going to block this measly 2/1. If you're using it to prevent a giant one of your own creatures from dying on a big attack, then sure, that's great, but you need setup for that, and I'm not sure that's justification enough to include this over other small creatures we've seen. Eye of Malcator is 3 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, scry 2. Whenever another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, the eye becomes a 4/4 Phyrexian Eye artifact creature until end of turn. This isn't as good as Glinthawk Idol, but it gives similar vibes. The scry is a nice way to set yourself up for at least 1 activation and swing in with a 4/4. This is not worth playing if you only have a few artifacts in your deck, but if you have many, or better yet, just a bunch of Eye of Malcators, just like 10 of them, then go nuts. Realistically, you'll need a good number of artifacts to make this work consistently, so keep that in mind when deciding whether or not to take this. Don't build around this card. Valuable inclusion in a limited deck should be more of a happy accident than anything else. Gitaxian Anatomist is 4 mana for a 2/5 Phyrexian Wizard. When it enters the battlefield, you may tap it. If you do, proliferate. Doesn't feel good tapping something with 5 toughness on entry to the battlefield, but getting a proliferate trigger out of the deal could be worth it if you've brought oil counters to play with. Regardless, if you're on the slower end of blue and you're looking to put up some walls, once this untaps, it will be a strong blocker for you. It isn't going to kill much, but it does turn off small attackers and blanks 4/4s. It's a great card to stop yourself from bleeding, especially since opponents on principle will not use removal on a card like this. Only play this if you're heavy into proliferate or if your deck is on the real slow side. Gitaxian Raptor is 3 mana for a 1/4 Phyrexian bird with flying, and it enters the battlefield with 3 oil counters on it. Remove an oil counter from the Raptor and it gets +1/-1 until end of turn. I love this. I adore Morphling-like cards like this. Super flexible, lets you play it the way you want to, and there's no activation cost besides removal of the counter itself. Great blocker in the air by default, amazing attacker if the sky is empty, at least for a turn, and you can always leave a counter on it to proliferate later. Don't get my tone wrong, I'm not first picking this card or anything, but it's a solid playable. Glistener Seer is 1 mana for a 0/3 Phyrexian Advisor and enters the battlefield with 3 oil counters on it. You can tap it and remove an oil counter from it to scry 1. I played Sigiled Starfish, and while this obviously isn't as good as that, it is a nod to it, and 3 activations, especially in the early game when you're looking for key spells or lands, are worth more than nothing. Drops early, blocks 2 mana 2/1s like a boss, and fixes your draws for a bit. It's fine in some decks, it's a filler card. Ichor Synthesizer is 2 mana for a 1/3 Phyrexian Wizard. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on the synthesizer. As long as it has 4 or more oil counters on it, it gets +2/+0 and can't be blocked. Cards like this for spell-slinging decks get printed all the time. Like in all those cases, this one's similar. You need enough spells for it to turn on reliably. It comes with no counters on it, so you need to get at least 4 non-creature spells or proliferate your butt off. All for a 3/3 unblockable. If you have a healthy spell package, this is fine as an early blocker that turns into inevitable damage. But if you don't, I would not prioritize this at all. Malcator's Watcher is 2 mana for a 1/1 artifact creature Phyrexian drone with flying and vigilance. When it dies, draw a card. Artifact version of Palace Familiar, and it comes with vigilance to boot. Due to the sheer number of 2/1s in the format along with mites running around everywhere, the stock for this Watcher has gone up as far as I'm concerned. I expect many to disagree with me, but I think it's playable. It'll replace itself and at worst protects you from big damage when you throw it in front of something. At best, it staves off attacks from a 2/1 forever and can swing over the top for a free damage every turn. This is a good card. Don't let the simplicity fool you. Cards with nearly this exact wording, stat line, and cost have been good and limited before, and they weren't artifacts that synergize with half the set. Meldweb Curator is 4 mana for a 3/4 Phyrexian wizard. When it enters the battlefield, put up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. Like I've said before this, with these spell-specific cards, you need an active reason to play it. This isn't a great filler card, so just ignore it unless you have spells to warrant its inclusion. Meldweb Strider is 5 mana for a 5/5 artifact vehicle with a crew cost of 3 and it has vigilance. It enters the battlefield with an oil counter on it. Remove an oil counter from it and it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. Interesting card. It comes with a counter that lets you turn it into a 5/5 to attack with only a single time, but if you can proliferate that oil counter instead of using it, this gains significant value. You can also get cheeky, crew it for 3, swing in with vigilance, then on the crackback, remove the oil counter and block with it. There's some play here. It's a chunky vehicle, but you need to make sure you have enough creatures to actively crew it, because once you hit 3 power as a crew cost, it's like a whole different world. Play this as long as you have the creatures and power depth to use it, or you have ways to proliferate the oil counters on it. Prologue to Phyrexia is 2 mana for an instant. Each opponent gets a poison counter, draw a card. Quote, please, for science, tell me how it feels, leave nothing out. That's hilarious. I can't be the only one who thinks Tamiyo being completed has somehow made her super interesting, just in a different way than normal. Card-wise, this is a super easy way to get the first poison counter on your opponent, and it replaces itself at instant speed. If you have corrupted shenanigans going on, lots of toxic stuff, getting that first poison has a lot of value. If not, this won't be particularly interesting for you. Unctus's Retrofitter is 3 mana for a 2/3 Phyrexian Artificer with Toxic 1. When it enters the battlefield, up to 1 target artifact you control becomes an artifact creature with base power and toughness 4/4 for as long as the Retrofitter remains on the battlefield. Great way to buff a might up, a small equipment, a tiny artifact like our friend Malcator's Watcher. Matter of fact, anything with evasion or toxic at all becomes crazy strong with a 4/4 reset on its stat line. You're going to need enough cheap artifacts to make use of this, but in the right deck, it's an all-star. Vivisurgeon's Insight is 3 of anything and 2 blue for a sorcery, draw 3 cards, proliferate. Giant draw spell with the set's keyword on it. Jace's Ingenuity saw play in limited, and this will too. Yes, it's expensive, but in a blue deck when the game is bound to go longer than your average game, not only does this refuel your hand in one fell swoop, but it comes with the added bonus of proliferate. If you're staring down lethal on the board, then obviously this isn't the best top deck, but basically any other scenario, and this will do just fine for you. Huge card advantage that can bring oil and poison counters with it. It's solidly playable. Both look relatively deep as far as solid playables are concerned for limited. I'm getting more excited by the day to draft this stuff. Let me know how you feel about all this in the comments and stay tuned for the rest of the series coming to you real soon. We have all the info you need, and as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.